Ed Kangas is the former global chair and CEO of Deloitte Touche, which he had that role until the year 2000 when he retired. But he's also one of the most experienced chairman of boards of directors and lead directors in the country. He's the chairman of the board of Deutsche Bank USA. He is the lead director of United Technologies. He has served on the board of Intuit, Allscripts, Tenet Healthcare, among many other companies. And so, welcome, Ed, to our Eisenberg class.
Thank you.
So, I'd like to talk to you today about the role of the board, and more specifically, the relationship between the board and management, and the role of the lead director. And we've talked previously about some circumstances that you've been involved with where you, as lead director, have had to make some very difficult and challenging leadership decisions. And I wonder if we could begin by talking about a situation, a difficult situation that you faced when serving as lead director at United Technologies.
Okay. Probably about 5-6 years ago, we had a CEO that's been in the news named Louis Chenevert, good man. He got engaged in doing a variety of things personally that took him away from his job. He was building a multi-million-dollar yacht in Taiwan, spending time there, wasn't as available as his management team needed. I was not aware of it, neither was the board. And I feel a little bad that I was not on top of it and didn't know it. But we got a whistleblower letter, most likely from someone inside the company, maybe someone involved in the travel department, which is the company has a fleet of 8 or 9 private jets. They had a lot of information. They said that our CEO was not focusing on his job. He was doing too many other things. And the letter went on with a great deal of detail. So as lead director, I was faced with a dilemma. What do I do about that? I called the general counsel. I talked to the CFO, who is now the CEO. I talked to outside counsel, and I said, here's what I want to do. And they concurred. I said, send the letter to Louis Chenevert, the current CEO at the time, and have him call me. And Louis did. And I said to Louis, is the letter factual? And he said, well, knowing you, you probably get internal audit all over it. And I said, yeah, but I don't have a report yet. He said, some of it's true. I said, Louis, do you think the person that wrote that letter is angry? He said, yes, I do. I said, what's the chance that they will make that letter public to the Wall Street Journal or others if we do nothing? He said, I don't know. He said, well, do you think the board will support me? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, they might, depending on what the result of the sort of our own investigation shows in terms of time spent and where and what you're doing. But if the letter goes public, it gets a lot more difficult. I said, I want you to think real hard about what you think you should do. If you want to say, I can deal with this, I want to remain as CEO, we'll discuss that with the board. I said, if you decide you want to retire resign on your own, that's a possibility as well. Think about it for the next 3 or 4 days. I called a special board meeting, which occurred 4 or 5 days later on a Sunday in New York. By that time, we had a report from our internal audit group in General Counsel's office that said substantially all of the things in the whistleblower letter were factual. He had not done anything illegal. He just was spending more time focusing on some personal things that took him away from the job. And it was causing the management team some problems because they couldn't get the access they needed. So we called a board meeting. I said, Louis, I don't want you to attend, but I said, you can be available by phone if you like, or we may want to talk to you. Or if you've made a decision before the board meeting, let me know. And he called me the morning of the board meeting. He said, Ed, I think the person that wrote this letter is inside the company. They knew too much. And if I don't retire now, they're going to make it public, and that's going to be damaging for me and for the company. I said, okay. We met with the board of directors. I gave them the report of the investigation that had gone on for 4 or 5 days. I gave them Louis's comments, and the board accepted his resignation and retirement, and we appointed Greg Hayes as CEO. I then, for a year or two, was chairman, non-executive chairman of the board, but once we knew Greg was the right guy in the right job, I told the board I should go back to being lead director and Greg should be chairman and CEO, and we did that.
So why, Ed, did you leave the decision to the CEO as opposed to consulting with other board members and making the decision yourselves?
How do I put it? I followed the notion of, it was pretty clear to me that if what was in the letter was true, that Louis would come to the conclusion, as he did, that he should resign and retire. And it's a whole lot easier to have it done that way than having the board take an action to terminate someone. Now, if Louis had done something illegal, had been involved in theft or something else, it might have handled it quite differently. This was a matter of where he was spending his time and was he focused on the job and some other, they were important but more incidental kinds of things. And I thought that Louis, he's a smart guy. He's a good man. I thought that he would come to the right conclusion and it would result in a better outcome, one that was better for him and better for the company. And yet action would be taken. People would be aware of it. There was enough information that got out. Reuters wrote an article on the issue, around the issue of, do you need to separate the chairman and the CEO and have a separate independent chairman? If you read the Reuters article, it'll say, well, in some cases, if the board is strong and the lead director is effective, it doesn't matter.
So this is not a situation, as I understand your description, where there was a crime that was being committed. It sounds like it falls more into the category of poor judgment. And I guess I wonder why he wasn't given a second chance, why the message wasn't, look, cut it out, you need to spend more time on the business, and at least give him a period of time to turn things around. Why wasn't that part of the thinking?
If Louis had decided that he wanted to stay, I don't know what the board's conclusion would have been, but the board might have done that. Mm-hmm. I frankly think the letter would have gone public. It would have been in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. It would have created a huge furor among shareholders for Louis. I think it would end up driving him out of the job. And so I thought the conclusion he came to was the best one for the company and for himself. So it wasn't a matter of, if everything could always be done totally privately, if this had been totally private, would I have considered, in terms of my own position, that we work with Louis going forward? I very well might have. On the other hand, United Technologies is a huge company, over $100 billion market cap. It's Pratt & Whitney and Otis Elevators and Sikorsky and Carrier Air Conditioning. It's a huge, huge international company. And the CEO was making tens of millions of dollars a year. How do I put it? When you're given that kind of responsibility and being paid that kind of money, you need absolutely 100% of your energies devoted to what the company does. And to be taking time off, significant amounts of time off, building a boat, being away, being not available to your team, it may not be illegal, but it's not right.
And to what extent is the board of directors responsible for keeping their eye on these kinds of activities? I mean, we have situations where where there was a lot of bad activity going on at Wells Fargo, and we've got all kinds of examples of situations where there's abusive behavior, where there's Me Too-like conduct at companies. I mean, to what extent should the board be held culpable for not finding out about these kinds of activities?
Well, I believe the board should know and should be aware. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. I think one of the things I've learned in this process, and it's something that I've established at all the boards I'm now involved with and advise others to, the general counsel of the company reports to the CEO, but the general counsel also has a reporting relationship to the lead director. And the general counsel typically knows about these kinds of issues as they're brewing. And if the lead counsel and the lead director are effective and they know about these things early, the lead director can work with the CEO or with others, a CFO or others, to make sure that these problems are resolved while they are still resolvable and can be fixed. I think that can be a tendency on the part of the management, general counsel, CFO, to say sometimes that the CEO is very powerful. They're not necessarily to go out of their way to tell the board or a lead director, because it could put themselves at jeopardy with a CEO. And so you have to establish the protocol and have the CEO agree with it, that the general counsel is going to have private conversation with the lead director about the ongoings within the company, culture, business, things that could be nipped in the bud and dealt with when they should. And frankly, any company, if you try to establish that policy, they will support it, and CEOs will support it, because CEOs are trying to do the best job they can. They got a very big, tough job, and they welcome that support in most cases.
So let's talk about board composition. And if you and as a lead director and as board chair, I'm sure that you have active involvement in composing boards. But if you had a blank slate for a significant company, and you're creating a board of directors, composing a board of directors that you think is going to be effective, how would you line up the draft picks? How would you put that board together? What would you look for? What would you strive for?
Well, you want to have several active or recently retired CEOs of companies of similar magnitude. They don't have to be the same industry, but they ought to be similar magnitude in terms of scope and complexity and size, etc.
And why is that?
How do I say this? If you've not been a CEO, you don't understand what it is to be a CEO. And the board's ultimate job is to hire and fire the CEO, evaluate the CEO, compensate the CEO, along with approving plans and mergers and acquisitions and other things. But fundamentally, the board's job is to make sure it has a high-performing CEO in place, counsel him, guide him or her, and give them all the support they can, but also be their mentor, their guiding force, and evaluate and compensate. I don't know how a board would do that with a CEO if you didn't have anyone on the board that ever been a CEO.
And should the CEO be recommending those people, or should they be people with more independence from the CEO?
It's okay for the CEO to suggest candidates, but the CEO should never pick. My view generally is the CEO or anyone else in management can recommend candidates for the board, along as can board members. You may use search firms and a variety of other sources to identify candidates. As a general rule, I would give the CEO a veto right. I mean, you don't want to have a board member that a CEO just can't work with. So I would give the CEO a veto right, a right of saying this person probably is just fine, but I wouldn't let the CEO pick who the board members are.
Okay, so we've got some CEOs on the board. Who else?
You'd like to have a couple of people that have really strong financial skills, ideally people that have been, CPAs at a major firm and really understood public accounting and reporting and SEC and all the financial reporting. Could be a CFO, someone who, and that's really ideal. You'd love to have someone who had deep professional skills along with someone who had switched and been a CFO of a company. So having a couple of people with really strong financial skills.
So let me just stop you there. So, but those are also skills that you can hire. And so why do you want those people with those skills to actually be in the board seats?
As you are dealing, if you're an audit committee or just an executive, if you're dealing with important financial reporting or decisions around acquisitions or in major investments or whatever, You need board members that really have the financial skills to evaluate what is being proposed, what is going to be reported to the outside parties. You can hire auditors, but you want people that are at the core of the business, know the CFO well, know the controller well. I'd say it's equally as important as having former CEOs on the board.
Okay, so we've got some people with financial expertise. What else?
I like it when there is someone on the board, generally one person enough, that has a deep legal or regulatory background that really understands the industry that you're working in. Then the next one would be you would like to have one or two people that have management experience in the industry or industries that the business is in. You'd like someone, if you're primarily in the aerospace business, you'd really like to have somebody that has some aerospace experience. Ideally, as a management person, it could be as a board experience if it's in depth enough, but you want some industry expertise on the board as well.
How about diversity? How is that important?
To me, it's absolutely critical, and I measure diversity both in terms of gender as well as heritage and background. I really like it when a board has at least 30%, maybe pushing 40% women on the board. I think that any company that doesn't have, one or two or even three people of ethnic background diversity, it's absolutely critical.
And how in your experience is that shown to be important? How is it in the real world? How does it really make a difference? How does it show up?
It's interesting. A story or two.
Sure.
United Technologies. It's had a couple of five-star generals on its board. Current one is Lloyd Austin, who was in charge of Central Command. Fabulous guy. He will talk about women in a way that I have learned about them well. Women view the world a little differently than men. And it's a plus. He will make the comment that great military leaders have some of those traits that some great women have. They are more passionate about the cause. They are more emotional about the culture. They make decisions on the same financial quantitative basis that we would. They often will have a sense of the market of people that are they're just a little different. And so my personal view is when you have a couple of women on a board, they will bring a perspective, even if they don't show the passion. They will feel very strongly about things. They will feel also very strongly about ethics and culture and so forth, and they help the board be more whole as a result.
All right, just to finish up, I'd like to talk a little bit more about culture. And to what extent would you agree that a values-based culture can be a real competitive advantage for a company?
There is no question that a values-based culture is when it is real, it will change the very nature of the company that you're at. Quick story, which you and I talked about earlier. We created Deloitte & Touche in 1990 through the merger of two firms, Touche Ross, Haskins, and Sells. We were all right. It was a firm that is it was average by my definition. I understood what we were fairly well. And we were one of the smaller of the big five firms at the time. We concluded that if we really someday wanted to be the best, that we had to have the best people. Half of the best people in the profession, whether it's accounting or tax or law or whatever, are women. We could recruit women, but we were not very good at retaining them. And none of the accounting firms were. If we ever could become the firm that was viewed as the best place for a woman to have a career, we would in fact change the nature of our firm, and we would compete differently in the marketplace, and we'd be a different firm. Let me jump to the end. Today, Many people don't know this. Deloitte last year passed PricewaterhouseCoopers and is the largest of the big four firms. The top 3 jobs today in the world, none of them are held by white males. The CEO of the U.S. is Kathy Engelbert. The CEO of Deloitte Consulting, $10 billion piece of the firm, largest division, is Janet Fouty. And the global CEO is Puneet Renjan. He's a man, but he's of Indian heritage, he's an American. That simply wouldn't happen today in any other firm. Deloitte today has more women partners as a percentage than any of the other firms. It has more women leaders, and the firm has been transformed in terms of how it thinks. It started with the advancement and retention of women in the firm. It changed along the way to men and women as colleagues. Today, women are at the core of the business. They're important to the business, and it has made the difference in why Deloitte today is, from a ranking point of view, my view is Pricewaterhouse and Deloitte are the 2 best firms. Deloitte is the largest of the firms. If you look at recent results in terms of audit client switches or major consulting engagements, Deloitte's winning hands down against all the firms. I will tell you, it was because the culture of the firm changed and we embedded in it the sense that men and women are colleagues. And believe me, that is not where we were in 1990.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for your thoughts, and I know my students greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
Pleased to do it. Thanks all.
All right.